eventually.
Good.
Welcome to the discussion session Tuesday, June 24th, 2025. I almost forget the process here.
Would you like me to run through the agenda items on
Let's
this?
go to item one.
Old age.
Taking advantage.
Careful. Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight's regular agenda, we have the adoption of a resolution for a grant application to the Alcoasand Green Revitalization of our Waterways Program. That's the GROW grant. We've applied for numerous grants in the past and received a lot of money towards those projects. This is actually reimbursement for a completed lining project. We also have the consideration to purchase a new vehicle for use by the fire chief. You received a memo in your packets last week on that. We have the consideration of an Allegheny County snow and ice control agreement. We do these every 3 years with Allegheny County, meaning that we handle snow and ice removal from county roads. Really not, I'll say it's sort of a break even for us, but it does provide better service to our residents because we get much more quickly than the county would. And then finally, we have the consideration for approval of the site plan on Washington Road, 500 Washington Road. That's for BAB orthodontics. That's all we have.
Perfect. So jumping in, item 2, we got EMS study. It's coming up.
Fred. So as you remember, the commission approved a study to review our emergency medical services. We put out an RFP, we interviewed a couple of different firms, and we selected Fitch and Associates. Fred Worster is with Fitch and has been working since February on pulling together some data information. So he's here tonight to give the commission an overview of kind of where we are at this point and some of the observations he has.
Thank you. Thanks, Commission. Good evening again. I was here last week at the MERTS Authority Board meeting and did some information gathering. Quick high level, what we've done since February. Since February, I've been engaged with Keith and Ian, connecting every 2 weeks as we reviewed data information. We send out about 150 question survey. Anytime we connect with an organization, we've had really great participation from MERTS, with them providing us, essentially, I don't think there's anything that has gone unanswered or we haven't been able to get our hands on. We have one outstanding individual. We're still trying to meet with the medical director. We just can't seem to line up some schedules and such. But we'll get that done prior to the end of the study. We always like to speak with the doctor that's in charge of the organization just to understand his or her perspective on clinical care and all of those things from the organization. In the MERTS board meeting last week, obviously one of the authority members from one of the partner communities is an ER physician and did offer some comment regarding his perception of clinical care, his perception of EMS in the area and such, which was very insightful as well. So we have, the way that we traditionally do this is again, we go through and we try and collect as much quantitative data as possible. So that proved to be a little interesting when we did some work with the Allegheny County 911 Center. Their information was slightly antiquated, not considerably useful. We work, all over the world. Obviously, not everywhere in the world has 911, but across the United States, we work in some pretty remote areas, and their 911 information is traditionally very accurate and helps us really look at things like how long does it take, although not necessarily part of the study, right? But how long does it take for them to answer a 911 call? How long are they giving information before they dispatch an ambulance? How long does it take the ambulance to respond? We had to do a lot of behind the scenes work with the dispatch center to get some form of usable data. And I say that, kind of with a caveat that part of the report that we will give has a data report. But again, the information that came out of what is called the CAD, the Computer Aided Dispatch software program for Allegheny County, was definitely more antiquated than I would have anticipated, and definitely didn't produce the information that we were necessarily looking for. example would be, tell me that as you dispatch 911 calls, what is an emergency call dispatched versus a non-emergency call? We can't get that information. So we like to look at that because when we look at some national standards, we look at response time metrics. Now, there's different response time metrics that you can look at. Some organizations use the National Fire Protection Association, some use the Commission on Fire Accreditation International, but we like to use those standards to say, not that one is better than the other, but here's some things to look at. Emergency versus non-emergency. We can't parse that out for your community here. So when I say that, the average response time, the average total response time is 11 minutes and 52 seconds, I can't break that out by community. I can't break that out by whether the MERTS ambulance was over here and went over there, whether they provided mutual aid to the city or anything. So when we say 11 minutes, 52 seconds, some might say, well, that's slow.
No context.
That's right. Some might say that seems fast. Some might say, I don't even know what that means. So national average, right, if we were talking about national standards we would think based on the community size, population, et cetera, we would think 8 minutes and 59 seconds would be the standard we would look at. So I cannot kind of punish MERTS because we don't have the 911 data to say that they're not meeting that standard. So when we look at all of that, it was tough for us to work through all of that. The simple things like for us to tell you that, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays are the busiest days of the week. The busiest times of the day are between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., where they're averaging more than 1.5 to almost 2 calls per hour. To tell you that, on average, they're doing about 29 calls a day. The fire department does about 1.5 EMS calls a day. I can tell you all of those things, and I feel very confident about that information. But if the commission is solely looking, as they decide some things to look at for the future, they're solely looking at response time. I want to make sure that the commission is well aware that I can't particularly stand behind that response time number and say that hard and fast, I would sink my teeth into that 11 minutes and 52 seconds, as that's the average response time for the ambulances in your community. So they can't produce that information. I did send you all a letter through Keith, obviously kind of outlining where we are in the process. So we're, again, minus meeting with you all this evening and meeting with the medical director. We have the people that we need to meet with, we have officially and efficiently completed that. There were 4 specific scope of work items in the RFP that we responded to. So we have worked to review the current financial structure. MERTS did have a recent audit, which they actually provided us a copy of that audit. We are having our financial people take a look at that to see if there's any significant red flags that we would like to discuss any further. My initial look, there are some things that I would potentially question as to, is it, and I believe that the term was used last week of, a higher end appetite versus a medium or a lower end appetite when it comes to some equipment and some of those types of things. We'll obviously take a look at all of that, but the one significant find that, and not that it's inappropriate, but the one thing that stuck out to me was in 2024, MERTS was faced with essentially writing off about $1.5 million of bad AR, bad debt from not collecting on EMS billing. So that directly impacted their bottom line for their 2024 audit. I mean, you can see they took $1.5 million off their budget. To talk through that quickly, that is an EMS billing problem that I think they have begun to address already. They have already contracted with a new EMS billing company, Digitech, which is a national firm. We do a fair amount of work with them across the nation. They seem to be very up to speed. Their workflows seem to really provide solid opportunity to make sure that I's are dotted, T's are crossed. The one kind of unfortunate part, as any EMS organization would think about changing billing companies, is there is always a downturn in revenue anytime you switch a billing company. You have to get Medicare, Medicaid switched over. You're looking at closing out all of the AR from the other billing company. And as is, they are seeing, the billing company that they gave notice to is all of a sudden starting to produce all of this money, but at the same time, starting to produce and say, well, guys, we needed to do all of these types of refunds, and now MERS is being faced with refunding money to patients. So it's this really interesting mix on the bell curve of, they're looking for more money and they are doing the due diligence of our billing companies not doing a good job, but they're gonna see a downturn in their revenue from EMS billing for a little bit. If you ask me what a little bit is, you can see that anywhere from 3 to 6 months sometimes. Now, I will tell you that Digitech being a national firm, they're definitely on the up and up when it comes to making sure that Medicare, Medicaid, and those payers are, and all of those pieces are aligned with them in their process. To continue on the EMS billing piece for a second, one very other interesting find we found is, so one of the partners of Fitch used to own an EMS billing company. So when we come in and do an EMS assessment, one of the things we really like to do is dive deep into what we call revenue cycle management, right? We're looking at what is being billed, what is being collected, and we ultimately take that all the way down to saying we use the term net cash per trip. So if we take every ambulance call that goes on, what is the net money that is overall collected for every trip, every time that ambulance goes out the door and transports? That's how Fitch runs numerous EMS organizations throughout the United States right now. And that's how we work at bill budgeting, right? If we say, okay, I know that in order to cover this gap, we need $700 net cash per trip, or I need $600 net cash per trip. Their 2023 number net cash per trip was about $475, minus some cents here and there. And so when I look at that, I'm like, well, this is a lower Medicaid area, right? We're not seeing Medicaid, maybe seeing Medicaid in some nursing homes, maybe some small pockets of geographic areas, but we're talking a suburb of Pittsburgh. The majority of people are employed. The majority of people probably have commercial insurance. And when we see what is called private pay on the payer mix, so that's Medicare, Medicaid, commercial insurance, all of those pieces, we look at that. When we see private pay, on a national average, we like to see private pay, meaning you have no insurance and you're responsible for paying 100% of your bill. We would think that number to be, on a national average, about 7% in any community. That fluctuates, obviously, urban versus rural versus all of that, government payers, but on average, about 7%. What we found is that MERS has about 20%. So that says to me one of a couple things. One is there's a lack of insurance issue in your community, which I don't know that I can particularly sink my teeth into. Or there's some type of billing process issue, whether that's not having enough information, whether that's the billing company not doing their job well enough, or some mix of all of that in between. I would believe, based on having conversations with the executive director, the chief, the lieutenants over at MERS, and some of that, I think it's probably a mix of a little bit of both of them. I would tend to lean, it's probably a little bit more heavy on the EMS billing company side than the MERS side. But, and I apologize for not giving you any background of myself before we started, but I hail from the other side of the state. Don't hold that against me, please. But I've run EMS organizations in Chester County outside of Philadelphia for years. And one thing that, we look at as we move through that is, the physician that was on the authority board said this the other night. He said, it's a real struggle in healthcare that documentation and all of those pieces have become so much more important than actually providing patient care. And unfortunately, in order for those insurers to cough up that money, we do have to find that sweet spot of providing the appropriate amount of information. Now, Mertz has changed their systems, and they also have worked with the local hospitals to have a software connection interface where there's a two-way kind of street in that that allows information to be passed back and forth. Not picking on any individual or group of individuals from Mertz, but the more information that they can capture and provide to the billing company, the easier the job of the billing company, the more money that they can traditionally produce. If they have to use some type of national clearinghouse in order to obtain social security number, address, phone number, insurance information, that simply delays the amount of time that you're seeing money come in the door. So the more information that the street level providers can obtain, i.e. appropriate spelling of a name, right? If you spell Josephine with a Y and not an I, right? Or all of those things all delay in time. Obviously, there's the Jane Doe, the John Doe that is, we have no information on. That's completely understandable, right? You can't get blood from a stone or whatever that analogy is, right? But I think that there could be some policy changes there that may help impact their bottom line. So we do an independent revenue assessment. We essentially estimate, without them making any changes to anything, they should be collecting about $510 per trip. So there's about a $35 per trip discrepancy. And if you run that out over this almost 8,000 transports that they've had, that's a significant gap in money. Their rates, their charge master, or what they're currently charging, the numbers are fixed, obviously, that you're going to collect from Medicare, Medicaid, right? You can't change those numbers. Those numbers haven't changed for decades. But most people, again, have some type of supplemental carrier as well. And then you have all of the people that have commercial insurance. So, sometimes are we using the commercial insurance entities to help provide that? We are. I think that Mertz could increase their rates some, and they would see an increase in revenue. I project that they could, with some increased rates and some better workflows and more information, that they could potentially collect anywhere between $700 and $720 net cash per trip. So we'd be looking at over a $200 increase potentially net cash per trip. Now that takes a lot of work, and that's not going to happen overnight, and that's not a flip of a switch. But is that doable? I do think that is doable. And so that would kind of lead me to say, as they came to the commission here looking for more money to support that addition of the new unit and new staff and all of that, they internally could potentially bridge some of that gap as well. So I think that there is an opportunity there for them, especially when it comes to that piece. And again, I did mention, anytime you have to write off bad debt in the excess of $1 million, that's very problematic. So I would venture to say that their new billing company will really help them. I know that when I was at the meeting, they were talking about some new collection policies and such that they were working to put in place as well, to talk about how they were going to handle bad debt moving forward. Were they going to pick a specific, 180 days or 365 days? They're working through all of that. Any questions before I jump on? I know I just rambled.
I just, you mentioned the 4 items in the RFP or the 4 scopes of work. And what I've heard so far is this is what Mertz is doing and this is what Mertz is not doing. I want to make sure there's equal emphasis, if not more, put on standards, models, things like that. Because when you come into an organization, it's easy to pick things apart. So I want to make sure that we're looking at things like, this is good practice, this is how things should be, this is a national average, this is a local average, this is a practice that should be upheld, and here are the reasons why. I just want to make sure we're getting into that as well, and
Sure.
not making this the Mertz and dartboard.
No, 100%, and that is absolutely on my radar screen. So one thing that we will do is Fitch has produced what we call the 50 benchmarks. So we will actually, and we use that across the nation, we will benchmark MERTs against those benchmarks that we've used in Reno, Nevada, in Washington State, and all of that. And essentially what we do is we say, do they comply with that benchmark? Do they partially comply, or do they not comply at all? And that gives some good solid background to say, okay, what are some areas of opportunity? There are some benchmarks there, though, that will not apply. One of them being the 911 center. We're not going to do any type of benchmarking regarding the 911 center because it wasn't part of our process here. But so that will be part of the report in those benchmarking items. One of the other specific things that I was going to point out was, as the commission, and I'll kind of jump to the end and come back through, as the commission kind of determines how they want to proceed, whether that's continue to support the authority and the process they're in, whether that's look at producing their own EMS organization, whether it becomes part of the fire department, whether you would choose to put it out to bid, or whatever you do. There are standards or metrics or things that I think should be considered when you're looking at exchanging money for service. So one of those would be, we like to look at clinical standards and say, are the people receiving the best care, right? Again, does it particularly matter if the ambulance gets there in 8 minutes and 59 seconds or 9 minutes and 1 second? Most research has shown that if there's not some type of first responder on location within 4 minutes, everybody's chance of survival greatly diminishes. It's been proven all over, King County, Washington, and all of that, that unless we get really somebody there in 4 minutes, our chance of survival really dramatically decreases. So some of the things, and we'll put an example of a clinical scorecard that could be used. Looking at specific things like maybe Mount Lebanon wants to say, hey, we really want to make sure that, patients that, let's pick something, that are having a stroke, have these things done to them and get to the appropriate closest facility in 20 minutes or less. There are places all across the United States that are moving to those types of metrics as opposed to saying, if you don't get an ambulance on location in 8 minutes and 59 seconds, 90% of the time, we're going to fine you $1,000 per month on the first time, and then all of these things. I don't feel that that's the way that this should go. I think that looking at those types of benchmarks and opportunities on how to advance patient care is really what should be looked at when you're looking at making decisions for the future. So we will provide in the final report, there will be a clinical scorecard with some recommendations there as well.
When it comes to kind of the overall financial model, and I'm thinking about some of these private companies that do this for profit. They clearly are working on a margin that as municipal authority, we don't have that concern. But we still need to be thoughtful about, how to make sure that it's an efficient organization. So my question, that is context, is how much are we, contributing, in terms of like tax dollars as a region, contributing as a percent of total, and how does that compare to other municipal authority structures or or even private entities who are finding other revenue streams to support whatever that gap is?
The private market, the private EMS agencies will leave a market where they're not traditionally seeing double-digit profit margins from. We are seeing that regularly across the United States. If they dip below 10% in a profit margin, they will up and execute their out and traditionally leave an area completely unsupported. We do see that fairly regularly occurring. We also see municipalities being proactive, with those places that are being serviced by for-profits and say, okay, we've got to have some type of stopgap in case they do leave. We've been in several RFP processes where they're looking for a profit and they have literally walked out during the RFP process and said, the profits aren't there, we're going to leave. So I don't personally see MERTS or the MERTS Authority getting up and walking out and saying, we're not going to provide EMS anymore. But to answer your question specifically on what's a healthy percentage, I think it varies by community, very honestly. I think using a formula that is widely accepted, actually, Matt and I were just talking about this before the meeting, of, regionalization of EMS, I think is what is on the next forefront. And I'm not saying that it needs to be, necessarily one company providing that service or one municipality providing the service. But when you have, and again, I apologize for geography here, but if you have town over here on this side of the hill and town over here on that side of the hill, and they're each either charging or not charging, and they're paying differently, and they're doing all sorts of things, the EMS community is shrinking. And we were talking about that when we were on the Zoom last week, right? It's shrinking by significant numbers, right? I mean, Pennsylvania's volunteerism is at an all-time low, all of those pieces together. But when you have different communities doing different things, it creates kind of this vortex or this cyclone effect of, well, who's right, who's wrong? You have some municipalities saying, well, we can do it for free. Some municipalities or authorities are charging, a fixed rate per household. Some are doing subscription service, some are not doing subscription service. And some are saying, well, we've got to be totally tax supported. And, that is a product of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania having the lowest level of local government, allowing each to make their own decisions or opportunities. So is there a right answer? I don't actually know the answer to that. Is there?
Well, let me ask you a different way.
Okay.
So if I just take a simple pie chart and say, insurance is gonna generally cover X, right? And annual memberships are gonna cover Y.
Mm-hmm.
What's Z? Right, what is not covered?
Sure.
that-
So if we look at it in reverse and say that traditionally for every ALS capable ambulance, so paramedic and EMT, 24-hour service, 365 days a year, on average costs about $1 million per unit.
Wow.
Roughly speaking.
Okay.
By the time you add in equipment, overhead, all of those things, you're looking at about $1 million. So if you use that as the kind of the leverage point, if we're saying Mertz has 4 and 3 units, I think that's right. Sorry, I'm getting it mixed up with other, right? So realistically speaking, they need roughly $4 million to cover the staff part of it and the trucks, and then whatever between the other overhead items. They've obviously need to, based on that net cash per trip, look at that. And then everybody would say, okay, what's the gap? Which is you're asking, what's the Z of that? And I don't think there is a commonality of what that Z is when it comes to what is the appropriate number of that Z is. Some organizations are producing enough to fund themselves simply through EMS billing. But they probably are at lower pay scales, lower fringe benefits, using lower priced EMS units, EMS equipment, and such. Traditionally, as you get closer to the metropolitan areas, those things increase, right? Wages increase, fringe benefits increase. Whether or not, you're using a Cadillac ambulance or a Chevy ambulance, I don't mean any disrespect by that, right? You can buy van ambulances for probably 2.5 to 1 box ambulance, right? But you're seeing now the lead time on ambulances. We were just talking about that, right? I mean, who would have ever thought, you're now 3 years and $1 million to buy a fire engine, right? I mean, that's, so all of that is compounding. So I don't know that I can specifically put a number or a percentage on that, but those are all factors that equal that Z, if that makes sense. I want to be respectful of time.
Yeah.
The last just kind of 2 items I want to talk about. Obviously, we did some observations of their operations. They've definitely, as you all know, have had a significant volume of leadership changes. I think that has directly impacted the organization as well. The one interesting point, and I made this recommendation in the authority meeting, was that the 2 lieutenants that they have working on their evenings, overnights, they carry a significant amount of workload. And I think that there's some kind of disparity there between the other leadership and what those individuals are doing. I think there can be some load balancing there, which may help provide some more opportunity for those individuals to actually lead the organization at night and on weekends and such. We did hear everyone that we've talked to, no one has made any comment about poor clinical care. We've heard all good things about high clinical care, high standards, high regard to patients, high regard to doing what's right, that they have essentially every piece of equipment that they need, not to make themselves look good, but to provide excellent patient care to your community. You know, they're paying a lot for their ambulances, but so are a lot of other places. Could they think about that as a potential cost savings? They could. Some other recommendations that we see, a lack of any type of strategic plan. You know, 1, 3, 5 year, there's no strategic plan, there's no financial planning, or limited, let me say it that way. And, you know, they have a significant amount of financial liabilities and such as well. That's all in their audit. Definitely, as I looked at that, was like, okay, you know, they've definitely spent a lot of their money down over time. One thing that, you know, in consideration is, I did mention to the commission, or I'm sorry, to the authority, looking at, you know, is there opportunity or option to potentially outsource some positions like a chief financial officer or some type of financial monitoring or service. Some of the municipalities, some of the partner municipalities offer some services in kind. I think it's Green Tree offers the building and some discounts on fuel. You know, I did mention, did I get
White
it?
Oak,
I'm sorry,
White Oak
White Oak,
as a building, right?
Whitehall?
White Oak.
Whitehall, okay.
White Oak.
Sorry,
Whitehall.
Whitehall, my apologies for getting that mixed up. Yep, they have some things. You know, I did speaking with Keith, it's another, you know, there's opportunities maybe here for some support in some financial considerations there. I think the one thing to really look at is the governance model of the authority really the right model? And are there opportunities or options to say 2 people per partner community? And do the municipal managers have a role in that authority board? I think that is something really for consideration of whether that's the municipal managers are the ones that are making the everyday decisions with the authority, and the 2 elected officials from each partner community kind of are providing oversight. I think there's just some opportunity there to look at that and say, is that the right model? Authorities in Pennsylvania, you know, have been here for a long time. The West Coast Authority model, very different than the East Coast Authority model. Traditionally in that authority model on the West Coast, you're looking at all about taxation, all about those pieces, and it's a little bit different here, right? It's traditionally looked at as a cost savings measure almost, and how to provide a service to a communal area, right? So I think that's one thing to look at. And then just kind of looking as what's next from here. So we'll start writing our report, we'll start producing recommendations. Those recommendations, I'll connect with Keith, we'll talk through all of them. Again, as I've shared with every individual I've talked to, there's no surprise when we write a report. There's no big aha or wow moment that Fitch writes a report and it's this big bombshell that drops. So Keith will be privy to all of that. How he shares that with all of you is up to all of you. But as we work through recommendations and such, we'll work hand in hand with Keith, and then producing a draft report, and then a final report, and then a presentation from there. I do think, you know, there are some funding things to look at, you know, some taxation opportunities, some, you know, does the authority look at that per household fee or not that per household fee like the Ross Westover,
It's Rescue.
Westview are doing.
Yep.
I think there's some options for all of that to be looked at. More than happy to answer anything, say anything, or wanted to give as much of a high-level overview as I could.
I'm
So-
really hoping in your report that you will include the suggestion that was at the authority meeting about not letting ambulances go to just any hospital in the city and get tied up for hours coming back because someone wanted to be close to their daughter and go to West Penn Hospital. Because I find that to be like an easy, low-hanging fruit, picking it off.
So I don't know that we would specifically say we recommend that that doesn't occur, or that does occur. We would potentially say that, again, because we're not directly working with the organization,
Sure.
right? We're working for the
For us, yeah.
municipality. A way to word that would be, in looking at opportunities to decrease length of time that the ambulance is tied up on incidents that may not necessarily be required. But we will not specifically come out and support 100% say that this is what should happen. All of our recommendations are just that. They're recommendations, they're options, they're opportunities. What happens with all of them at the end is really then up to the commission here and how they respond and work with the authority and MERTS.
You mentioned a scorecard that relates to some of the health outcomes. I can't remember how you phrased
The
it.
clinical scorecard.
Thank you. You also mentioned you were having trouble getting some types of data from the county that you would normally get. Curious, as you're going through this, when we get the clinical scorecard, will we get something that tells us whether the information you recommend in that clinical scorecard is available to us? I'm curious as to whether, like, if we get a template with a clinical scorecard and it's like, we can't get any of these, 48 of the 50 things, I wonder how useful that kind of scorecard is for us.
Sure, so that would be then between the commission or the municipality and the authority.
Right.
And we always recommend some type of agreement, some type of written agreement that says, for this, right, we will receive this, and those types of things. So we will absolutely, in our report, there will be a recommendation for some type of understanding and work through the agreement that is there between the authority and the municipalities to say, is that the right agreement? Should there be other things considered? One of those being clinical metrics. We would highly recommend that.
I think to Commissioner Grella's point though, some of this is sitting on 911's shoulders, which is outside of even the authority's control.
Right.
And we just might not be able to get certain data
hospital.
points,
Right.
right, without which kind of leads to my question in your report is, are you going to specifically call out the deficiency
In 911.
in 911?
We will.
Good.
Because that was certainly one of the reasons why we selected you folks to say you were trying to leverage your connections with that, and unfortunately it was
We absolutely
disappointing.
will
shall we say.
discuss that as again, we weren't here to look at the 911 system, right? The
Sure.
911
Yeah,
phone
sure.
system, but we will absolutely make that a critical finding that we did struggle with data and such.
Timetable?
I see no reason for end of summer. Probably sooner. Not that this means anything to you all. At Fitch, we lose 2 weeks in July. We hold an annual conference and we are gone for 2 weeks, completely wrapped up with our conference. I will say that I have the opportunity to do a bunch of work right now. So between here and I'm actually working with somebody down south and somebody up north, I'm in the process of writing all 3 reports right now. So a draft report, I see no issue having a draft report throughout before July. I don't see that being an issue. And then approval from that draft report is up to you all and how that goes from there.
One other more strategic question, right? Because as I interpret a lot of these challenges, they are long-term and they're structural, right? Attracting the next generation, right? Creating, compensation models that are going to attract those people long-term, right? Having the capital program established that looks at facilities and looks at, apparatus replacement cycles, et cetera, right? All those pieces. That, when I work on those types of plans, tend to be 10+ years, right? To try to understand the trend over time. Knowing that, right, I can never really get out 10 years, but what I can do is I can understand where an organization is going financially as they're thinking about, I need to raise salaries, I need to give better paid time off programs, whatever the things are that are going to address these structural drivers that we're thinking about for the next 10, 20 years. How are you, or I mean, I know that your analysis is very much in the here and now, but as you think about these things, are you integrating that kind of structural thinking into kind of how do you address some of these structural challenges? Medicare, Medicaid, right? It's a big unknown right now as to does that funding model sustain long-term, right? So I know it's very much operational, but there's also a lot of kind of just systemic issues. I'm curious how you kind of tease some of that out through your report, because it's not MERTS, it's systematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's even greater, right? It's to how the EMS region right here versus on the other side of the state. Here, the EMS region supports 37 counties. Right on the east side of the state, you've got, Philadelphia's its own region, Chester County's own region, Montgomery. So you have all of those very interesting pieces that all really make up some of the problems of the EMS system. You have, we talked about it at the authority meeting, about the use of certain, the Commonwealth put together a new certification level years ago, the advanced EMT. Some places are using that in place of paramedics, some places aren't. There's this really interesting mix of all of that, right? We do put recommendations there, just to answer your question regarding fleet and those things. Those recommendations will all be in there, reporting those types of incidents and when vehicles should be replaced and all that. That's all part of our standard reporting process. But when it comes to, true long-term strategic planning, that in and of itself is traditionally, we would make the recommendation that there is no long-term strategic plan and that one should be implemented. I don't know that we would specifically go into, here's what we think a strategic plan should include. We'll put some of those things in there, but again, I don't know that was specifically part of the scope of work. But again, the lack of the strategic plan and, a 1, 3, 5 year like we talked about at the meeting, we will definitely call those things out. So I don't know if I answered your question specifically or not. Did I miss something?
Plan suggestions would be appreciated, whatever you can say, a 3-year, 5-year plan would include X or Y. I think
We can provide some opportunity there, absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure.
The other is, and it may, again, not be in your purview, is that like there've been some vehicles ordered, they won't go online for another, I hope you won't get them for another year or two. But trying to get a sense of, were they the right vehicles to buy?
That's
I would say,
That's a tough-
I asked the tough questions, I mean, that's why we're here.
And that's a tough question to answer, right? To say, do you need 4-wheel drive? Do you not need 4-wheel drive? Do you need, do you need the Mercedes versus the Kia? I think overall, it should fall into a plan that supports, that financially supports. So, can you buy a $350,000 ambulance when you don't have that money? I think that's the way that you look at that, as opposed to saying the XYZ ambulance that they bought that cost them $400,000 was the wrong ambulance. And those are just hypotheticals. I don't actually know
Yeah,
what they
sure.
bought or what they cost.
Ordered.
Okay.
I want to give Fred some credit too, because kind of expanded the number of people that I asked
Yes.
Fred to speak to.
Right.
In addition to Doug Forrest, the new executive director, he spoke to David Turkle, he spoke to Matt Coleman, who's head of the paramedics union, he talked to the head of the regional EMS
Right.
agency. So really trying to give everybody the ability to have some inputs, to collect some information. And as far as Doug DeForest, I would say that Doug has really sort of embraced this process and has been in frequent contact with Fred. And he really does recognize some of the same things I think that Fred has recognized, and would like to sort of find a path forward to be able to, address the issues and make Mertz a stronger organization at the end of the day.
I think that's.
And not to forget the fire department either. We met with the fire department very early on. They
Right.
participated.
Right.
We all love the fire department, Fred. I don't have to give them any props.
I mean, that's where I started, so, but, no, I just,
I'm gonna throw some credit because the union president is in the audience today, so I think the fact that he's here, yes, he's a Mount Lebanon resident, but he's here, he wants to find out more about the process, and I think that says something again about
had great
participation
conversations.
of the
Yeah,
group.
that's terrific.
I think it's important that the staff cares. We hear that every meeting.
And again-
To want to provide excellent care. So we make sure the commission is aware of that, that we hear it and we recognize it.
I want to say this again, when it comes to clinical care or the work that the staff does, we have heard zero negative comment regarding that. We have heard, we have not heard that, then, when Mertz shows up, we're not sure we have not heard any of that, where we do hear a lot of that, in various places we go. We hear lots of concern about clinical care, about patient care, about the personnel. We have not heard any negativity regarding that whatsoever. So, great. Thanks for having me, I appreciate
Thanks
it.
for coming in, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Fred. Yeah, appreciate it.
Trees.
Mr. Sokol.
Good evening, Commissioners. How are you today?
How are you?
Thanks for having me. We're here to discuss and review a couple of proposals that were received by the department for forestry operations and the RFP for that. I forwarded to the manager the RFP that we're recommending last week. Hopefully you had an opportunity to maybe look that over a little bit. It was submitted with your packets, but I'll briefly go over that and review some of the highlights of that, of what took place to come to that decision. So requests for proposals were sent to several consultants and posted on our municipal website in early April. The proposals were accepted through May the 7th. The structure of the RFP was developed with a focus primarily on previous concerns expressed by the commission and residents related to our forestry operations and our street tree maintenance program. Two firms submitted the proposals, which were reviewed by 4 of our staff members, including myself, and both firms were interviewed by the review team. It was agreed upon by the review team that the Davie Resource Group matched the deliverables of the RFP and they had the experience required to complete a comprehensive review of our forestry operation. The scope of work submitted by Davie was as follows. DRG Group indicated they will develop an urban forest management plan with assistance from the core team and municipal staff. Development of the management plan will be a multi-step process and will encompass the following information. A review of existing policies, programs, and plans. With that, they'll evaluate current policies, programs, and plans affecting trees within the municipality. They'll also explore strategies for private landowners, which means to develop strategies to encourage private landowners to maintain trees and enhance the tree canopy on their own property, such as free vouchers or programs for residents. They will also investigate incentives for tree retention and propose incentives for retaining trees on private properties. They propose to promote the promotion of tree values, recommend ways to promote the values of trees in the community. They will review the tree care and planting priorities, identify priorities in tree care and our planting. Progress measurement, they will describe how progress on a plan of action will be measured. They'll review our staffing and resources. I think this is a key one right here. Provide recommendations for staffing structure, needed functions, equipment, budget, and potential revenue sources for plan implementation. That's key. With the amount of work that we have and the staffing that we have right now, I think that's probably one of the top one, if not. Policy recommendations, they'll suggest changes to the municipality's policies or municipal code. and provide a resource list, compile a list of acceptable trees and prohibited trees, tree care standards for the municipality staff and contractors, and other resources. And finally, the conflict avoidance strategy. I think this is probably number 1 or 2. Develop strategies and to avoid conflicts with overhead utility lines and damage to sidewalks by roots from municipal trees. So the 2 that we received, as I said, the one that we're recommending was actually the cheaper of the 2, and that was from Davy Resource Group. Their proposal was for $115,000. We actually have $90,000 in the budget. That was the funding that was appropriated for this study and report. I would maybe, ask the commission or encourage you to potentially make this funding available. There are some things that we probably could cut out of this, or some of it, we're probably going to come in under that 115. I talked to the lead with the Davy group this afternoon to find out where we could maybe trim some of this. And they have multiple meetings. I think they suggested like 4 meetings with the commission. I really don't think we're going to need that. Probably 1 to introduce them and 1 follow-up at the end. So I think automatically we're going to probably have some reduction in that cost, but I would like to have the ability to do this entire, I think as a comprehensive review of this program, we're probably not going to have an opportunity to do this again. And I would like to have the ability or the opportunity to do that at this time. So.
It's really
I had a question for you, is that, with the additional costs, I was looking at the proposal, there's some things they said, well, that may be extra. They're talking about, looking at page 11 of their proposal, and talking about these tasks only include an assessment of existing tree inventory data, no new inventory or tree risk assessments to be conducted. And one of the bullet points below that is talking about, one of the extras would be a maintenance plan with short and long-term actions. I guess my ask is to say, assuming the group wants to allocate the additional funding, and if there's, essentially, can some of this perhaps be addressed, if not all 115,000 is allocated, to say, can we hit some of these points here, looking at the maintenance plan with long and short-term actions. Sure, we'd love to get their feedback, after they've done all this study, so hopefully there's a way to get that deliverable as well.
I can confirm, but my understanding was that everything that's listed in here is what they're proposing to provide as part of that $115,000.
It is the fact they did kind of a carve out in their proposal. I was like, we get it, great. It didn't look like it was necessarily in there, so I want to make sure it could be in there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, Steve, that everything that's in here is proposed to be done for the $115,000.
Just get them to sign in blood and we're all set.
We've had this conversation. I'm less worried about a couple thousand here or there. And
Yeah.
I don't mean that to say it's not important, but at least in the 4th Ward, where trees are by far the biggest complaint that residents have in dealing with them and when they're not properly maintained. We've talked about backlogs in tree trimming requests. We've talked about how we process that. We've talked about arborists and when trees are cut. It's either a lack of understanding upon, from the residents as to what the process is, or the timing, or even us as commissioners relaying information back to residents. But what's important to me is that we understand that the plan that we eventually put together is a plan that is sustainable. I don't know the exact number of trees we replant every year, but, I'm just making up a number. Let's say it's 500. Maybe there should be 100. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe that's grossly underestimated. I don't know that. So understanding, are we doing the right things with the types of trees that we have? Do they need to grow to be 200 feet tall? Are there ways to stop that? Do we need to do more to force the utilities to do what they're legally responsible to do, but don't do anyway? Things like that. So, and then just looking at maintenance plans, and are there things that we can do in terms of policy that maybe we're not doing that might help alleviate some of that pressure? So making sure that we get that kind of information. That's kind of what's important to me, and that was kind of the my hope as to what we'll get from this.
And I think that should be covered, but, you know, that's what the first meeting would be for with the commission, is to express those concerns and make sure that we identify them and address them as part of this study, because this should be a comprehensive study. I mean,
Right.
you know,
Right.
the roots are a big thing too, with the sidewalk
Oh,
slabs.
yeah.
I mean, it's huge.
Yeah,
Utility pruning, it's huge too. So, you know, I'm not an expert, and that's why we're bringing a third party in to tell us what they think we should do. These people do this every day. They have PhDs on their staff.
Yeah.
You know, we have people that can lead us in the right direction. I honestly think, you know, and part of it's my fault, I guess I haven't expressed it clearly enough over the years, but, you know, it's really just a numbers game. I mean, because staffing, you know, we have, give or take 10,000 trees. Some, the big oak trees over in your area that you see, you can't fit your arms around them. And, you know, our policy is internally to replace every tree that we remove if we can every year. So we usually take 150 to 200 trees down every year. And those are typically mature trees. Some of them are dead replants, we call them, and they don't survive the planting process. But it's our policy to try to maintain the integrity of the tree-lined streets. So that's what we try to do. And, you know, that was the ethos, if you will, of the Parks Advisory Board and the different boards that we have, that we're trying to increase the canopy, not reduce it.
I think that's important what you just said. I think we have to start, and I don't know that we've tackled this question, but I think we have to start from a place where we decide what do we want from a tree canopy in our community, and then everything flows from that, right? Like if we say, yes, we agree with you, Rudy, that we should have this kind of tree canopy, and that comes with a certain plan, and we find that we are underfunded by 200%, that's a real resource constraint that we have. And then at that point, we have to decide, do we continue with that kind of work? Do we scale back to meet the budget? Or do we make a argument that we need to increase budget, whether it's staff, materials, outsourcing,
Right.
other planning? I think we have to, like, we've been kind of playing with that for years, right? Going back, well, how can we tweak how we send trucks? And maybe that makes up a backlog for a year. Or, you know, let's do better, you know, GPS and coordinates and understand, you know, like, I think those are incremental changes, but we haven't had a conversation about what do we want and how do we resource that properly? You know?
Well, I think that's part of it too. I think, what are we trying to accomplish, and what's the standard that we're trying to set? Because, you know, it could be an unrealistic goal that we can't
chasing.
reach. Right, or like you said, we need 200 or 300% increase on the budget
Right.
in order to meet that goal, and to use staff for worst case scenario as well.
Right.
You know, my biggest thing is safety. So, you know, if someone calls about a branch that's ready to fall on the street or a sidewalk, or, you know, threatens somebody's property, we're gonna drop everything, we're gonna go to that. So that, you know, that creates a backlog in itself, just making sure that you're triaging every slip that comes in to make sure that you're addressing the most important or the most hazardous things first. And that could push things back a week, a month, a year. And it happens, I mean, frequently.
I think some of these bigger items that we've looked at, where we've looked at like a life cycle cost of these items, I'm kind of hoping we get a plan that tells us that, right? Because then we can weigh this against, you know, now we're talking about other items that we have to dig into in our budget season, right? And there are always big items that we need to take care of. It just comes down to, where does this fit in that? Because if we find out that this needs to be resourced differently, whether from materials, personnel, that's gonna have to come in front of us, you know, November, to talk about, we've got 9 things, this is one of them, where is it in the priority list?
Right, and can we do it, right, realistically, or, you know.
Right.
So, Rudy, I think one of the first conversations I ever had with you was, how much should we spend on our trees? You said, we spend 600,000. I said, how much should we spend on trees?
You did a spreadsheet.
And then I said, okay, clearly, we don't necessarily have a framework to understand the structural cost of these assets that we've been putting in the ground for a long time, right? And you guys probably all heard me say this, and I know a lot of other people have, but I'm gonna say it anyway. This, for me, these are assets that we put in the ground, but we don't understand the cost of maintaining those
Long-term.
assets long-term. I plant a tree thinking it's gonna be great for my grandkids to push in it 30 years, but I don't think about having to cut it down and spend $20,000 a year 50. But we have to, right? And because this is a commitment we are making to future residents and their taxes, right, by every time we plant a tree. And the reality is that we are at a place where we have underfunded, the collective we have underfunded tree management for the amount of trees we planted. No one's wrong in that.
Right.
But I think it's on our shoulders to set a path forward and say, this is what we should be spending to maintain this quality of canopy, address the utilities, address the sidewalks, address the stormwater systems, have a comprehensive approach. Yeah, it takes a long time, but if we keep our head, looking down and don't say, oh, we actually should be, and so when I did this, my spreadsheet, my number came in at 1.8 million, not 600,000. Well, that's a huge delta that we would have to solve for, right? And that was just a proxy number, right? I was not getting into the fine-grained details. But that was where I was coming in saying, there's a huge delta here that we collectively need to be looking at. It's not on Rudy to do that. Rudy's got a great team to go execute. But how do we bring someone in to help us do this? So 25,000? Yes, please.
Yeah.
We got to get on this path.
Yeah.
It's a great topic for our community, right? We have a great tree canopy. It is exceptionally valuable, right? It really does amazing things for our home values. It does amazing things for our air quality. You can go on and on and on. We just got to continue to invest in it and not think we can ignore it.
Are we all saying the same thing where we're less worried about, like, I know, Rudy, you're trying to be budget conscious, which we appreciate, but I think we're all saying the same thing, right? Like, we want to get this done, we want to get it done the right way, a couple thousand extra, we're okay with that. Is anybody against that?
No, I think we've got a majority, well, I've heard from Jeff, but I mean, I'm a yes.
I think suggesting that there's a few less meetings with them sounded good, but otherwise.
We'll write the agenda to read at a cost not to exceed.
Yeah.
Everything
Yeah,
sounds
that's
great.
right.
Makes sense. Again, that's typically what we do. My other question for Rudy, because I don't think you mentioned it, did they give us a time frame to complete the study?
6 months minimum, probably more realistically, 8 to 10 months, something like that.
Realistically, we'll not have it for this budget cycle.
Unless there's some
Upcoming
low-hanging
budget
fruit that they
cycle.
might be able to recommend that's
But
not
we may
part of
be
the
able
final
to-
report.
Okay, and to Commissioner Grella's point, over the last several years, the commission has proactively sort of approved additional funds to bring a third-party contractor in for dormant prunes, to
Yes.
remove some of the larger trees that require a crane, which this piece of course we don't have. So again, I think there's been a recognition, it's just to your point, not understanding the total cost of the maintenance and what we should be putting in place. So-
There's a ton of sense to do.
I mean, Rudy said it, they're in triage mode, we've got triage, that's good.
Nice.
You just wanted to say that again, that's all.
But yeah, I mean, we've put significant money to it. There have been years where we've put a lot of extra money toward tree maintenance in a lot of the different wards, which is important.
And our programs are better than most communities. I mean, you have to realize that too. But we're trying to manage that as part of the overall operation too. So we don't really, and our guys are great at doing the work, but when they have to run back and forth to different parts of the community, when we get 3 or 4 calls after a storm to check if a branch is safe or not, that takes time away from their day of actually cutting trees, So I think maybe probably one of the first things is to have a certified arborist possibly on staff, or at least, have the resource to that, where we can call them in as we need them to kind of do some management for us outside of the actual physical work.
You want that or a street sweeper more? You gotta make choices.
Choices.
There goes the street sweeper again,
Again,
thrown under the bus.
Thank you for the report, appreciate it.
thank you.
Just to tie that up, we're good, like, so that, he made a recommendation, we've all seen it, we're good, that'll move
Draft an
forward.
agenda item, we'll put it on the next commission agenda for approval.
Great.
Getting aside about budget, well, not, if there's anything to think about setting aside for the 2026 budget. We obviously don't know, the study won't be done for 8 to 10 months, but by the time we get to November, December, we want to, put some money into sort of the same season. It's a very nebulous thing. but
I'll
the
flip
idea.
that back to you a little bit as one of the elected officials who actually, I make a recommended budget, commission votes and actually approves the budget that we end up with. We always are trying to be very conscious of available reserves. I'll say the amount of money that we have in the general fund. So if we are a little prudent in terms of what we spend on, we'll have, as we do every year, we go through and we make budget amendments, right?
Sure.
Issues that come up during the year. we'll take that approach and make sure that we have adequate funding to begin to address whatever we get from that.
I think, Steve, this is gonna come out much like the brick conversation we had. It's how much do we wanna spend? And then it becomes a conversation of how important is it to the residents that we tackle an issue like this? Because to Andrew's point, and maybe it's just numbers out of thin air, I suspect, just based on the number of complaints that I get, that there's a very big delta between what we could spend and what we do spend.
True, much like bricks, where we get to the end, we get to budget time and say, well, let's set aside X.
Yeah.
We don't know if X is gonna cover the whole thing, but let's at least get some money set aside towards this
Yeah,
project. So
sounds like we're gonna have to do that.
And you did something similar in last year's budget related to, I'll say, traffic calming or potential small
Right.
project
That's
traffic
right,
calming,
yes.
$30,000 was,
Right.
but so we can do something similar this year.
Right.
Well, and yeah, I always go back to, these are incremental moves, right? This isn't about solving, the delta in one fell swoop. It's more, in my opinion, about how do we inform staff of the policy objectives long-term? Give them the toolkit to know that, look, I've got to, the goal is to do X. I'm going to hire this person, or we're gonna contract out, it's gonna cost this much more, for the next 5 years. Those are all variables, right, that I'm not worried about the one-off. I'm actually more worried about that structural discussion, right, of what is that long-term funding plan? Because again, they've got to figure out how to get there. And that's a tax discussion and a, resource discussion every year for the next 30 years.
And I agree
Right.
with that, what you're saying. I guess I'm looking from my perspective of, this is gonna be the last budget I get to vote on. And so the idea of wanting to think about setting some seed money, I'm always using tree analogies here.
Seeds and triage, wow. Over there, it's hot in this room.
On that note, boards and authorities?
Getting hotter.
Resiliency met, we didn't have too much to cover, but we did, John Vogel is reelected as the chair, Lynn Lindley is the vice chair, and we welcomed on Lane Avosovich-Lozada, so that was good, but as far as what we covered, it wasn't all that much, but we meet again tomorrow, so should do some new stuff, but staff liaison did great work, did let us know that Final Fridays will be starting this Friday, so.
My gosh,
So make sure to get out.
Big switch up.
Even July is coming. Oh, right up June is coming.
let's hope it's cool.
But not much, not much.
I can just say that I did not make the last mobility board meeting, and we meet, in a couple weeks, so. With my apologies.
We kind of heard Mertz.
Yeah, Mertz is tomorrow night.
Well, but we also had a meeting with Fitch last week, which was very productive to talk about in terms of the authority itself. That went well. Library just conducted their garden tour on Sunday. I don't know how it went, but I'm guessing it went well. It's usually a big hit. They're looking at their refresh and applying for a grant through the state. That was voted on at the last board meeting, and that should be in process right now. Civic Engagement Board, Noah Evans was reelected as the chair. Adam Flango, unfortunately, had to resign because he has a second baby due in 2 months or something. So we have an opening on the Civic Engagement Board. If anybody knows of anybody interested, tell them to talk to Laura and apply.
Do we want to pull any of the past applicants we talked about?
We always do.
Okay.
Yeah,
We always do. That's
Michelle has
automatic.
those ready to go.
Oh, good, okay.
We're gonna go through those, you'll get those in your
Yeah, because
packets.
we talked to a few people who thought.
Yeah,
Yeah,
could be good,
okay.
yeah.
Adam is he attending one more meeting?
Yeah, he was attending the Pride Festival.
Yeah, there was
And then I
something
think it was
about,
at the beginning of July was his, he may be the last meeting, I'm not
Yeah.
sure, but, yeah.
so we'll make that appointment, I'll get you Christian.
Yeah.
School had 24 retirees this year. But other than that, the strategic plan is pretty locked and in place. That's up on their website. It's akin to like our comprehensive plan, although a slightly shorter time period. And it's a nice presentation. You can download it on the site. It's like docs and PDFs, and it's very comprehensive. So if you haven't read it yet and you want to understand what's going on in the school, it's a good report to read. That's in final now, so are locked in for next year.
That's it?
Red Fort Pit.